Despite renewed enthusiasm on the left in the wake of the 𝗗𝗦𝗦𝗧𝗛 takeover, many polls still show Trump with a slight lead this November. That, combined with growing awareness of the horrors contained within Project 2025, and I've been talking about that for like a year at this point, and Trump's very close connection with its creators despite what he says.
Trump wrote, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, I wish them luck. But I have nothing to do with them."
This all has people feeling uneasy about the future of this country, to say the least. Things have been feeling sinister for years, and the looming election has people feeling on edge. Because of this, a growing number of Americans are beginning to consider, should I leave the United States for good? But just how many people are acting on their political fears? Where could they even go in a world that seems to be growing incredibly more hostile to immigrants, even the white ones? Is it time to pack your bags and run? This is why people are leaving America. Roll the intro.
I think people are beginning to wonder if the US is as great as they always thought it was.
So along with just existing in the United States, I also have a lot of stress and anxiety generally, and that can mean that some nights I cannot get my brain to stop going around and around in my head and just let me fall asleep. So I rely on my partner on today's video, Beam, to help me drift into a peaceful, lovely slumber. And when I get more sleep, I generally feel less stressed overall, so it's a self-perpetuating cycle of happy, calm sleep. I love this for me. And I want that for you. Beam's Dream Nighttime Blend is a healthy hot cocoa that helps you achieve better sleep. In clinical studies, participants who took Dream felt significant improvements in how often they felt stressed during the day, how rested they felt, and how often they felt like they had enough energy. Dream helps support anyone like me who struggles to fall asleep and stay asleep. It's also a natural bedtime routine that offers a lot of benefits, not least of which being that this stuff is freaking delicious, y'all. And I love a sweet treat right before bed, and instead of giving me a sugar rush, Dream sends me right off into peaceful slumbers. And if it's hot outside, you can pour Dream over ice or turn it into delicious nighttime popsicles, or even throw it into your Ninja Creamy and make bedtime ice cream. To get your hands on the easiest way to get to sleep and stay asleep, click the link below and use code Leeja to get up to 35% off at checkout. Thanks to Beam for partnering with me on today's video and keeping me sane by helping me get more sleep. Truly. Thank you. I remember back in 2016 when Trump won the election and people were talking about jumping ship to Canada, and I felt that fear too. The consensus that I remember reaching amongst myself, my friends, and at least the culture and content creators I was consuming at the time was that no, we won't leave. We're gonna stay and fight. He didn't win the popular vote. There are good people here, and if we just push back and stand up to him and his people, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. Well, it's been 8 years. 8 long years. And I think there are a lot of things that feel very naive about the 2016 version of us. We really thought Hillary would do it. We really thought that a cameo on Broad City sealed her fate. That Ilana salute had us all feeling some kind of way. Also, when Ilana followed me on Instagram was when I knew I had made it. Hi, Ilana. But that's not the point. The point is, I certainly felt more positive in 2016 about my ability to truly make change happen. I was about to start law school. Trump was an anomaly. We still had a government full of people who I thought still gave a shit about democracy and stuff. Today feels much different. Kamala, as the Democratic nominee, has given me a slight glimmer of hope that I realized I haven't felt since before the election of 2016, 8 long years ago. But other than that, things have been feeling pretty bleak. And after having gone through the first one, a second Trump presidency feels like too much to handle. And clearly, a lot of people feel the same. I made a TikTok talking about leaving America that got over 2 million views. The overwhelming sentiment? Fear. But I wanted to get scientific about the idea of leaving. I wanted to know more about what is driving people to leave the US or not, and how serious they actually are about getting the hell out of here. So I took a survey about people's thoughts on leaving the US. 2,500 of you responded. Here are the results. Though I will note that my viewers tend to be more politically engaged and active than your average swath of the United States, and the survey was taken before Biden stepped down. And at least for now, there seems to be a glimmer of hope. Unclear how long that hope will last, but the point is that this data represents my self-selecting audience and not the overall feelings of the average population. But still, the results were surprising for a number of reasons. One of which being that there is a very vocal minority of leftists and extreme leftists in my comment section who love to police me on my leftist purity and call me out if I stray from their black and white views on what's right and what's wrong. And they love telling me how disappointed they are in me when I step out of line. Okay, mom. So I was expecting an onslaught of comments in this survey from people who mirrored the loudest voices voices in my comment section, people who believed that leaving the US was an abuse of privilege that showed that the people who leave don't actually give a shit about human rights or the suffering of others and are willing to abandon the masses of people who don't have the privilege to leave, and so if you leave, you're bad, and in fact, even if you're thinking about leaving, you're bad. The results of this survey show that that's not the case, and that usually the loudest voices online do not represent the will or beliefs of the majority of people. Let that be a lesson to us all, shall we? That is a message from me to me. But first, why leave in the first place? Of the 2,570 respondents in my survey, 47% of you said that recent political events in the United States have made you consider leaving, but it doesn't seem possible for you to leave. Another 21% of you are seriously considering leaving, and another 17% have thought about leaving, but not seriously. That means that fully 85% of respondents have at least entertained the idea of leaving the United States in light of recent political events. 51% of the people surveyed with serious plans to leave anticipate their departure date to be within the next 2 years, with 22% saying they plan to leave within the next 12 months. And the vast majority, fully 76% of people with serious plans to leave the US said they want to do so primarily for political reasons. The second most popular answer was for health reasons, and this makes sense, as health tourism is a growing industry in which it can often be more cost-effective for Americans to buy a plane ticket and obtain healthcare overseas than to try to get it here. But when you have a chronic health condition, it can sometimes be easier to simply move to the countries that will actually provide you the care that you need without the fear of losing your job and therefore what little health coverage you do have here in the States. If you're curious why we're the only similarly situated country in the world that ties health insurance to employment, check out my deep dive on why US healthcare is so broken after you're done with this video. But like I said, the vast majority, 76% of people with serious plans to leave, said they want to do so primarily for political reasons. This is partially because my viewers tend to be interested in politics and to lean left, and if you've been paying any attention to politics over the last few years, things really aren't going well for the left lately. My viewers also include a large number of LGBTQ folks, disabled folks, and people of color, all of whom are particular targets of the far-right extremism that's gripping this country. So it makes sense that they would feel motivated to leave for their own self-preservation. Add on top of all of this that my viewers tend to be consumers of large amounts of political content. Yes, I know what you people watch. YouTube tells me on the back end what other videos your peepers are peeping, so I know what you're doing. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this type of content, the content that I make, while well-intentioned, doesn't add to the levels of political-based anxiety that my viewers feel. I, too, feel my cortisol levels rising every time I open social media because my algorithm knows I'll always stop and watch or read the particularly unsettling political posts and discussions, so that's what the algorithm feeds me. It's a self-perpetuating cycle that can leave people in fight or flight mode, feeling actively in danger even when sitting safely inside their air-conditioned homes on the couch having quiet TikTok enrichment time in their enclosure. There's no present and active danger right here and now, but it can still feel like the walls are closing in all the same. I feel it even though I'm a white, straight-passing cis person who is not pregnant and will not get pregnant and has no children whose lives and rights are in danger every day and lives in Minnesota, one of the most progressive states in the country. The greatest danger I face these days, other than random gun violence, which is a big one that I do think about a lot, is being called a depressed, childless cat lady, which is technically factually accurate, though the depression is being effectively managed through medication. Thanks for asking, JD. Anyway, all that to say, I get it. Anxiety is high, and I don't even have a particularly marginalized identity that puts me in danger beyond the general daily dangers of being a woman generally in the world and existing in a country with more than 2 guns for every 1 person. It is a very human and very normal instinct to want to get the fuck out when you feel this actively threatened, which is exactly why approximately 2 years ago, I started jokingly saying to my partner, LOL, what if we just left? What if we just left the United States? LOL, we could just leave. Should we leave though? No, seriously. Of the 2,570 respondents to my viewer survey about leaving the United States, only 95, less than 4%, currently live outside of the US. So the stats on their answers is limited, but it's still illuminating. 26% of respondents living outside the US left for political reasons, the highest of all reasons for leaving, followed closely by leaving for work at 23%. I then asked those few who had left the US how they feel about US politics and current events and the direction that this country is headed. Most responses sounded something like this. Pure dumpster fire. It seems like every week I'm messaging my best friend back in the US and asking him, what the fuck? But then I was like, wait, I need more information from Americans living outside of the US. So I flew to Amsterdam and asked them myself. Their responses were complex and eye-opening.
I'm Julia.
So my name's Greg.
My name is Kylie.
I'm John Patterson.
I came from California to the Netherlands, but I was originally born in Sydney, Australia, and then I moved to California when I was 8.
We're both from South Louisiana originally, but spent the last 7 years or so in Seattle.
To really experience peace, it has been a huge kind of improvement to also how much lower my stress levels have gotten.
Before we moved, things just generally felt pretty crazy. So I think it's kind of a breath of fresh air that things are generally kind of chill here.
We really like the pace of Amsterdam and the pace of the Netherlands in general. That we really were drawn to the work culture, the work-life balance, the focus on like family life and your life outside of work and just having a nice time is more of a priority here, we felt, and so that was kind of the drawing factor.
Honestly, just refreshing to not be on the social media drip feed every day, where I felt like in the United States it's very much my job to be informed about all these things so that I can try to argue with different people in my life. I think now I'm still voting every year. I'm registered. I'm going to vote, but like me knowing more about it is not going to do anything, and that's kind of refreshing.
They miss me, but some parts are also glad that I was able to make a decision for myself. Unfortunately, for my family, it was quite divisive. So my mom, she came from China to Australia and then went to America. There was that lack of alignment with my immediate family in terms of how I was motivated to do the move compared to maybe their projections on how I was doing the move based on kind of their experiences on why they made the move.
I mean, I think my parents were probably the most opinionated. They were like, what are you doing? My mom visited Austria once in the 1980s, and so everything that came with like the communist influence is what her picture is, and like austerity and everybody having like the same car because that's the only car that you're allowed to produce kind of thing. So that's her vision of that. And then the drip feed of right-wing media.
Most people either think, oh my God, that's so cool, I wish I could do that, how are you doing that? Like it's like that kind of thing. Or my family specifically, I think they just don't get why. They're still very happy for me, and like I know my mom thinks I'm living my best life and she's like good for her, but I think they just don't understand why.
The activism burnout, it's because of the policies. Always, we get like one step forward, we make one win here, but then it's always at risk of being overturned. Another part of it is just the bipolarization in America, where it seems like, oh, there's two sides, but neither side really fits us as like a couple. While we want to be in a place that's more socially liberal and not have to always, fight for every single, I think, little piece.
Right before the pandemic was when I started getting more involved in kind of the, I guess, local political scene and stuff. Then after a while, I learned it's a very up and down, back and forth kind of one step forward, two steps back kind of thing.
I'm disabled and became disabled when I was 24. I'll need something like $100,000 surgery every 10 years or so, and Trump and his friends decided that they would like to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which is what ensures that I can get medical care. I'm really involved with local politics, and after a few years you're like, it's honestly just getting less popular, so like at a certain point, what right do I have to tell them they're wrong? Maybe, I don't know, stop fighting and go somewhere else where people agree with me.
Honestly, I pay a lot less attention. To some parts, I think I feel a little bit of kind of like a survivor's guilt. Like with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, some parts like I still have friends and family, back in the States, and they have to deal with this decision. And for me, it's like, oh, it's great, that I have the privilege that I'm no longer affected by it. I'm so removed physically and culturally from it that I only talk about it when I feel like talking about it. I will talk to, my friends about it, but they have to kind of deal and live with it every day. It's a very interesting experience that I have this distance?
It's scary back there. It felt good to be able to get the fuck out of there at a certain point. Like, it did feel like we were escaping something. I feel it feels similarly as it did when I lived in Washington, getting away from Louisiana. And it was hard to look back and see my friends and family that still live in Louisiana that do not have those protections and that like have their rights being taken away. And it's also hard knowing that they vote for that. That's the other part that's like weird. It feels weirdly patronizing because I'm like, oh, I'm so smart, I know everything, I'm college educated, I'm liberal. My silly old conservative parents, they don't know what they're voting for. That's the problem. When like, that's not true. They have their own beliefs. They can make their own decisions. It's just hard to have those two things at the same time.
There's definitely been a rise, I think, in anti-immigrant sentiment among Dutch people, Dutch voters here. But I think in their minds, I'm one of the good ones. I'm educated, I'm professional.
I think there's integration is a big topic here of people from non-Western backgrounds. That's how they describe it. And I think we had a lot of time and resources to put into making that work and try to have Dutch friends and learn the language and be involved. I think also the benefit that American culture is exported heavily into Europe through media and stuff, and so there's almost always a positive connotation on some level. There's very few people here who meet Americans and are kind of prejudiced against Americans. I don't know if that's really a thing even.
Like, certainly there's a rising anti-expat, knowledge migrant sentiment in the Netherlands and Europe in general. Like, France is going to the far right. I kind of see where they're coming from. Like, my grandparents didn't speak English, they spoke Cajun French, and then just like one generation we lost that entirely from the Americanization of Louisiana. And so I get what they're afraid of, and I try to put my best foot forward. So I'm not fluent, but I'm conversational in Dutch. Do your best to actually give a crap about where you're going to, and I think people will mostly be cool.
I know my partner works with a lot of people that are from other countries, and everyone seems very why would you leave America? It's America. You know, a lot of other countries see America as the place you go to. And so when you come here, they're like, what?
I always wanted to escape the South when I was little, and I got to Seattle and I saw the grass certainly was greener. I honestly grew a deeper attachment with my Southern heritage, being away from it and a bit more removed from the nasty parts of it. And a similar thing is happening here where I'm feeling patriotic in ways that I did not expect. Every time I hear an American accent, I'm like, oh, Kylie, Americans, let's go talk to them. I didn't really appreciate just how global the US was. I think a lot of people think, oh, Europeans know tons about all these different countries. As long as they're in Europe, yes, but we went out to eat and half my team had not had Indian food ever. Or I've yet to meet a person who just knew what pho was. So I think there's a lot of worldliness that you get from being an American that should be embraced and celebrated. I think our differences are what make us the best country for immigrants, the best country for global culture. Honestly, just a great country to be from. And if you stopped me a year ago and asked me if America is one of the best countries to be from, I don't know if I would have given the same answer.
Thank you to Josh, Kylie, Greg, and Julia, who met up with me in Amsterdam. I had such a great afternoon with you and very much appreciated your insights and your time. What struck me the most about talking to people who've made the move abroad was how their perception of the United States changed when they got out of it. It is so hard to have any perspective when you're in a burning building. It can feel like we're constantly in a panic because of our proximity to what's happening. But I hadn't considered that it's actually more complicated than the United States is completely bad and everyone who can should leave. For many people all over the world, the US is still the place they dream of one day living. There are still opportunities here that aren't available other places. There are still everyday luxuries that we take for granted. There are still aspects of American culture that can be loved while also maintaining a critical eye on the parts that we don't love. I'll say it right now, I was in Europe in June and it was hot as balls, and Europe simply doesn't do AC like we do here. They also don't have Diet Coke there. Sorry, Coke Zero is not the same. Okay, I'm kidding, but like there are, if you can believe it, things about American culture that are lovable, but it seems like you don't see them until you've left and now feel nostalgic for them. There is a levity and a sense of humor in Americans that you don't get everywhere else. There is a can-do attitude and a willingness to work hard that I think, when not taken to extremes, gives people the space to dream and build things. There is a level of diversity that, while making things much more complicated, just doesn't exist in many other countries. Amsterdam was white as hell, y'all. And relatedly, there are things to criticize about literally every country. Anti-immigrant racism and xenophobia is rampant throughout Europe and elsewhere. Corruption infects many governments around the world. The history of many countries is steeped in slavery, bigotry, and violence. That's the nature of life. You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you, as they say. And a lot of that context is bad. There is no other magical country that you can move to where life will be an easy walk in the park and there will be nothing to criticize. And leaving won't solve all your inner problems either. Wherever you go, there you are, unfortunately. That doesn't mean leaving isn't still the preferable option for some people, but this entire project has really complicated the narrative for me. And I left my experience chatting with Americans in Amsterdam, having had the rose-colored glasses removed from my views on escaping America for greener pastures elsewhere. Turns out, it's hard no matter what you choose. So why leave? Because you have to choose a hard either way, and for some people, the hard that they choose is the one where they leave the US. And a majority of the respondents in my survey and the people I met up with in Amsterdam all had difficult, complicated emotions about their choice to leave. But for some of them, ultimately, they found that living outside of the US makes them overall happier than if they lived here. But then, why stay? In my survey of viewers, of the people who say they do not plan on leaving the US, their primary reason for wanting to stay was for friends, family, and community, with 31% of respondents citing that reason. The second most popular reason to stay was money, with 15% saying that money prevented them from leaving the US. And tying for third place was 14% of respondents saying that it's easier to stay, and another 14% saying they want to stay and fight the good fight. For the 14% who say that it's easier to stay, in many ways, yeah, it is. Leaving the United States is complicated and difficult, even if the process is somewhat straightforward and you have support along the way, like applying for a student visa through a university or having a job that will sponsor you. It's hard. Most people in the US are just trying to stay afloat and don't have the bandwidth to figure out an international move. That being said, I think it's a mistake to make a sweeping generalization that if you're able to, you should stay and fight. I think when many people on the left say that, they're picturing some all-out revolution, some crumbling and rebirth of the system, something very cinematic. And unfortunately, that's not how change happens. And that kind of dramatic change is not usually great for many people, not least of which the people who are already marginalized. We glorify martyrdom on both the left and the right. And when martyrdom becomes the expectation, I think that's misplaced, unrealistic, and a misunderstanding of the numerous complex reasons why people become active in a movement. It also dissuades people who aren't interested in being selfless cinematic martyrs, who maybe just want to try phone banking or something, from ever getting involved in a movement in the first place. When progressive perfection and martyrdom become the only acceptable way to participate in the fight for progressive change, most people are going to tap out. That's not how you build a movement. So staying and fighting can look very different for everyone. But far and away, the biggest reason people are choosing to stay is for their community and their loved ones. And as human as the urge to run away from the danger is, the urge to be part of a community is equally as strong and essential to human thriving. That is a fact I have only learned to appreciate more the more I've left home and as I've gotten older. Attachment to people and to a place isn't a sign of weakness or small-mindedness, the way that I thought it was when I was younger. It comes from a profound understanding of my deeply human need for connection. And it comes from a growing understanding of how incredibly lucky I am to have these deep interpersonal relationships with people who I know love me unconditionally and will support me through anything. That is the definition of human thriving. That is what we evolved to need. That's not something to throw away lightly if you have it. But that's also something you can grow and cultivate in a new place, especially if you don't have it in the place where you currently are. So it's equally valid to leave the place you know if it and the community within it is not supporting your thriving. And I think I saw these sentiments reflected in a lot of the responses in this viewer survey. Then I asked the open-ended question, what are your opinions on people who leave the US to live abroad? This is where I assumed the onslaught would happen, the negative, hard leftist stance that you have to stay and fight or else. But I was surprised. There were certainly a handful of answers like this one. They are fortunate to have the resources to do so. Unfortunately, those very same resources could have been used to make things better for the people who can't leave. It's white flight on a global scale. And I respect their decision, but I think people who can afford to put up with staying in the US should, in order to support the people who don't have the means to leave and would face the worst impacts of conservative policies. Both fair answers, but they fall in line generally with what I thought was the majority opinion on the left. However, I was surprised to find that the vast majority of answers were some amalgamation of the following: I have no opinion, or I'm jealous of them, or seems like a good idea, or you do you, boo. I think the key takeaway here is, again, the loudest people on the internet, or on the news, or in the media, or in politics, don't necessarily represent the majority of Americans. And that, in fact, most of us, I think, while caring about others and the greater good, are also just trying to be happy and live meaningful lives, first and foremost. And the way that looks for each person is unique and depends on a lot of different factors. And finally, I left the last survey question open for anyone to leave closing thoughts. Obviously, the responses were way too varied to sum up in a single example, but the overall emotion I saw was still fear. I saw a lot of queer folks feeling scared for their futures, parents afraid for the future of their children, and overall a lot of fear of a potential second term for Donald Trump. The responses also clearly conveyed that a lot of people are thinking very hard and very carefully about whether they see their futures here in the United States. Whether or not they actually make the jump to leave is another thing, especially because many people voiced concerns that they financially couldn't make it work. There's also anxiety that what's happening in the US will simply spread elsewhere, especially because many countries are already turning further right than we've seen since before World War II. Literally this month, we saw large anti-immigrant violent far-right demonstrations in the UK, fueled by disinformation and hate. It can happen anywhere. And many people voiced concerns about leaving their families and communities, weighing the pros and cons of remaining where they may experience hostility due to their identity, but also of leaving the support system they currently have. And I think Harris stepping in as the new nominee has injected a lot of enthusiasm and hope into this election. Reporters are saying that they haven't seen this level of enthusiasm since the Obama years. So we could be in a period of transition, and I do hope that the enthusiasm continues through the election and into greater organizing around progressive causes, which my next few videos are actually going to touch on. But that doesn't erase the fact of what this country has been through over the last 8 years. And I think it still weighs on all of us that there's an extremely large faction of people in the United States dedicated to hate and bigotry who have done a lot of damage to our country and to the most vulnerable people in it, and who aren't just going to go away if Harris wins in November. Typically, these things happen like pendulums in America, so just because it's swinging in our direction doesn't mean there won't be powerful backlash that will require ongoing work to counteract. So it turns out that the choice of whether to leave or to stay is complicated and multifaceted and cannot be argued away by leftist internet trolls telling you that the choice is simple: either stay and fight or leave and be a coward who's abusing your privilege. It also isn't just as simple as leaving this country and living happily ever after. The decision to leave your home is not one that anyone makes lightly. And I think we as a society have a tendency to flatten the experiences of people who leave home, whether it's people coming into America from the southern border, who many see as a blanket threat or a statistic on a piece of paper, a single stereotyped brown person coming to steal our jobs, or it's people leaving America to live luxurious expat lives free of any care in the world. It's not that simple. Every individual has a complex web of experiences and circumstances that inform their choice to leave or to stay. And doing research for this video has increased my empathy and understanding of what it means to leave home and what it means to make the active choice not to leave. So, am I gonna leave? I've been talking about leaving the US for literally 2 years at this point. It's been my hyperfixation of choice. I have spent years researching it, including multiple international trips and even obtaining dual citizenship. If you want all my tips and tricks for how to leave that I've learned throughout the years, check out my Patreon-only video series on it. It cannot fit into one main channel video. After all that time and energy, clearly I've learned a lot and I've thought about it a lot. While I was traveling abroad, a few things happened that gave me some pause. And France had that disastrous election where we were sure that the far right was going to take over and throw the entire region into chaos. And while it was all temporary for me, I was only in Europe for 12 days and then heading home, it gave me a taste of what it feels like to be separated from community in an uncertain world. Sitting in my hotel, watching the results of the French election come in made me feel just as insane as watching things unfold in America makes me, but I was far away from my entire community and support system at the same time. And I realized that moving abroad is hard. Like, I knew that, obviously. I studied abroad in college. I understand intellectually that an international move would generally be hard. That's obvious. But I felt it. I felt the hard, even just a taste of it. And staying in the United States is also hard. But I've built up a really beautiful community of people who I've known for decades, who are my best friends and my family, who love me unconditionally and who provide unbelievable amounts of love and support in my life. And all in a city that I genuinely love, in a state that's heading in a direction that aligns with what I believe in. Those are all incredible privileges. And not just in the political check your privilege guilt trippy sense. I mean, truly, like, what an absolute privilege and gift to have that. And so leaving that, even though these people in this place will always be here for me when I come back to visit, even though my friends and community will still love me from afar, even still, leaving that is not something I would do lightly. And so, after years of blustering on and on about wanting to leave the United States, online, on this YouTube channel, and to anyone who'd listen, I've made the decision that, in fact, I'm gonna stay. Not in a martyr-fueled campaign to save America, but in fact in a very selfish act of wanting to lean into the privilege of the community I have here. Because staying is hard, but leaving is hard too. But at least here, I'd be doing the hard stuff in the community I love instead of alone in a foreign land. I reserve the right to change my mind, but for now, I'm happy to lean into my community and set down even more roots right here where I am. So what are you gonna do? How are you feeling about the way that America is going now that Harris is leading the Democratic Party? Do you have plans to leave or to stay? If you'd like to see the massive spreadsheet of answers to this survey that I've been talking about, I'll leave the link in the description below. Again, check out my Patreon where I'll be laying out everything I've learned about leaving in a series of Patreon exclusive videos. Because for many people, the choice to leave is still the preferred option, and I have a lot of knowledge to share. Thank you to my supporters, including my newest supporters, supporters in my royal tier, and an extra special shout out to my multi-platinum supporters, 𝗬𝗓 Lucas, Joshua Cole, Thomas Johnson, Sophia Sands, Anthony Giles, Tay, and Brett Piontek. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you liked this video, you'll also like my video about whether we're heading towards World War III. We have fun around here, don't we? Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.